Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hope you're all having a lovely Friday, whether it's morning or nighttime for you. My name is Alyssa Nichol, and today with me on the show, I am so excited to have a guest that we will get to in one moment. But first, our panelist, Justin. How are you this morning, darling?
Doing good, doing good. How are you?
Doing well. So excited to be here with you guys. It's always the best way to kick off the weekend for me. So, and Mike, how are you doing?
Fine. I'm
Excellent.
gonna be very brief so we can get on to our guest. Justin, whatever. Yeah, move on.
Our guest of honor today is the amazing, magnificent Jeremy Elbourn. How are you, darling? How are you doing?
I'm doing great now that I'm here.
Excellent. We got a rundown of all the dog beds in the room,
Mm-hmm.
so we may or may not get a guest schnoodle on the stream. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah. You're going to see Mal wandering through the background trying to get attention from me.
Excellent. Jeremy, can you, for those who are new to the Angular community, we've kind of got an influx of new people. So whether they're in the chat right now or watching this recording later, can you do a little bit of an introduction for yourself? Who are you?
Yes. I should have put more information here in my little lower third bar. But I'm Jeremy Elbourn. I am the tech lead for Angular, or sometimes we use the term Uber tech lead. The Angular team is split into multiple different sub-teams, and so I'm the tech lead for all of those, which each have their own sub-tech leads who are more directly responsible for the day-to-day work going on there.
How many sub-teams?
So there's the framework team, there's the tooling team, which makes Angular CLI and works on the Chrome DevTools, the browser extension, and also some of our infrastructure inside of Google. There is the components team, which makes Angular Material, CDK, a couple of other things. We have our own dev infra team, or people may more commonly call that DevOps, which is working on our own tooling and infrastructure. We're kind of weird as teams at Google because we're not using all of Google's internal confidential infrastructure to build our stuff, but we also then have to sync into it and make sure that all still works. So we have a little bit more of a complicated situation there. So we have kind of some of our own stuff. And we also have a DevRel team, which is Minko's team, which is in a separate part of the Google organization. It's not in the same branch of the engineering organization tree, but still part of the Angular team.
Okay, and then you are over all of that and essentially just meet with everyone all the time to keep all the parts going.
Yeah, Mark and I were just talking about this on stream last week. Is most of my time is meetings, more than 20 hours a week of meetings. Yeah. And I am but I am not a manager, right? I actually am not a people manager. I am more focused on the technical aspects. I am still technically an IC, even though I don't really do a ton of coding these days. Yeah. Although I did do some coding for V17.
Oh, I am so pumped to have you on the show. I know today we're doing a bit of a history, and Mike secretly hopes there's we get to talk about the future too. But I am fine with sticking to the past. Mike, you're asking for a lot. All right, that's all.
So if we are going to be talking about history, my first question is how long? And with your introduction and everything, how long have you been on the Angular team?
So I joined the Angular team in January of 2015. And in fact, I would have to check my calendar, but I think actually today, this day we are speaking, is my anniversary on the team. So I think this would be my
nine?
From 2015 to 2024 would be that adds up to 9 to me.
I am amazing at math.
You were real quick with the year. I'm it's what year are we? You were right there with it. You knew it was.
Yeah, I remember all of my major milestone years. I can just peek over here at my work calendar and jump to.
That's so cool. 9 years.
Jump to 2015. Let's see. Yeah, I had I was in New York before this, and so I had my movers come on the 17th of January. And then I guess technically the 19th of that year, that was Martin Luther King Day. So I wasn't working that day, but it was that was my like first week on the Angular team.
That's so cool. Were you always in this role then? Did you mention that? Like when you were brought on, or did you move around to different?
Definitely not always in this role for sure. When I started on the Angular team, I was just the TL of the components team, which at the time was just 2 people. It was myself and another engineer who's no longer on the team named Rob Besserly. And then there were some other like folks who didn't work at Google who were also kind of working on Angular material at that time.
Okay.
And yeah, I was, a pretty junior engineer at that point, and so I had a lot to learn.
And a question, because I don't know how it works anymore, because I know at one point it was like everyone had to be in person. Since you're managing, I think it was 5 teams, it might have been more. Is everyone like, do you see them? You like walk through this big office building and you're like, hi, Bob, and like it's everybody? Or is it like all remote now, or is it a mix? Like how does that work?
So the Angular team is fully distributed now.
Okay.
So, back when I first started, right, we were all physically in person in Mountain View every day. And over the pandemic, we did get the opportunity at Google to transition the team to be fully distributed. So some people on the team are still going into an office every day. I go into the office most days. I only really stay at home when I have a reason to, such as when I'm streaming or when I'm on a podcast. And otherwise, I am here in Seattle now. I'm the only team member in Seattle.
Okay.
And we have people in, I just go down the list, Portland and in Sunnyvale in the Bay Area, although there's, very few people there left. And Ann Arbor and New York and Copenhagen and Berlin and Zurich. I could keep going.
I thought it went in that direction. I just wanted to make sure, because in my head, I still had this mental image of you like walking through this massive office space with all the teams like in little cubicles. I don't know why, but yes. Okay. So it is distributed now. That's excellent. Yeah. Honestly, I don't know if I could ever go back, because in Orlando, we were driving to our offices it was an hour both ways. So wow. That doesn't count as work time, right? So like in my head, it's unimaginable to go back to that, but not everyone has that kind of drive. So
yeah, I didn't know you lived in Orlando. I lived in Orlando.
Ah, yes,
I went to school at UCF.
I went to school at Full Sail, so that's
nice.
Yeah, for web dev. That's so funny. No, I loved it there, and honestly, my heart's still in Orlando. Anytime I like pop through Florida, I'm like home, and most people are like, you're not allowed to talk positively right now about Florida. And I'm like, I'm not like,
yeah, I feel bad. It's gone downhill.
I know, but it's still in my mind home, just because, it was my first big city. I don't know. People, they laugh at me when I call Orlando the big city, but yeah. So Seattle. And when was the Seattle move? Was that just during the pandemic for you?
Yeah, that was during the pandemic. It's about 2 years ago now.
Okay, nice. It's a very gorgeous home. As I said before we went live, I totally thought it was a fake backdrop. And then his dog moved, and I was like, oh, what witchcraft? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we do have a question from Hans, but we can tackle that because it seems more like a future. So if you're still on the stream, Hans, we shall. I am not ignoring you, but we'll talk about that if we talk about the future. But yeah, let's dive into, because I'm honestly excited to get some behind the scenes of some of the things that I know happened, or some features that used to exist, things like that. So what aspect shall we dive into, Jeremy? Tell us.
Oh, so, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them if you want to drive this more interview style. But also, the topic I put in the little scheduler was just talking about how we are evolving Angular. And, you've probably seen in all of our RFCs and all of our releases and everything, some of the larger changes we're making to the framework. And I was just going to kind of talk a little casually about how we think about evolving the framework and what our goals are and some of the things we're trying to do.
Yeah, maybe Han's question isn't too far off the mark then, because he was just asking about all other frameworks that are becoming popular right now. What's the plan to stay on foot? And I feel like there's multiple prongs to this fork that Angular has going forward. And I don't think any one reason, for instance, to be the most popular framework as one reason, right? Like I feel like there's like multiple reasons that we're moving in this direction and moving forward. Justin, did you have a thought? I'm sorry, I interrupted your hand raise.
No, I do. I have a question, but we could answer that question first, and then I could follow up on the question.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. So, like, the goal for us isn't to try to like compete with other frameworks, right? We love being able to operate in open source and just try to build tools that will make developers' lives easier. And we are very inspired by all of the work that other developers are doing on other web frameworks and other tooling. If you've seen, all of the work we've done on Signals, obviously that is inspired very much by the reactivity model in Vue and in Solid and Preact. And there are incredible engineers who have been trailblazing on a lot of this. And we are blessed to be able to see the work that they've done and say, hey, those are great ideas. And they're going to bring the whole ecosystem forward. And we will, bring Angular along for that ride. And in particular, bring Angular developers along for the ride. And, going back to the question here, right? It phrases it as like, I think like there is this like competitive aspect to it, right? Of like, like these things are becoming popular, right? It must be like the zero-sum game where you then also become less popular. And we just don't really think about it that way, right? There's more developers every day, and there's plenty of room for different solutions. Like there's no one size fits all solution for web development. And we are focused on, again, like making Angular the best it can be. And, it's good at solving certain kinds of problems, but maybe you decide that something else is better for your specific use case or your specific problem. And that's great, right? All of these tools are great and good, and people should use the thing that they think is going to give them the most value in their project.
I find it really odd that people gravitate towards like the competitive nature of it and going like, I'll compare this to this and how are you going to outdo this, when it's like, it's not a product that we're deciding to buy, right? And we're like, I want the product that I'm buying to be better than the other product that I could buy. It's like open source software and like, it's weird. It's an odd mindset, right?
It's all free.
Yes, but you have to admit it's human nature to like.
I mean, yes, we love when people choose Angular, right? We love, seeing lots of developers show up at ngConf and like watch our live streams. Like, who wouldn't? But
right.
In terms of the actual technology, right? We're focused on kind of this iterative loop of saying like, hey, here's what developers are trying to accomplish today. Here's the challenges they're running into. Here's the friction points they're running into. What can we do to make that easier? And sometimes it's a small thing. Sometimes it's a big thing that takes multiple years. And we are, making bets about, something like Signals. We're making a big bet. There's risk in that bet of saying like, this is a change that's going to take us multiple years. It's going to take multiple years for the ecosystem to kind of transition to, what we have today, to Signals. And sometimes you have to make moves like that in order to continue being able to solve problems as the ecosystem evolves. But ultimately, it's that same loop of like, identify a problem and execute on a solution and then move on to the next one.
Just with a lot more foresight, hopefully, so that by the end of it, it was the right jump, I guess.
This may be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like we're almost at a point that performance improvements within applications is a point of diminishing return, that most of the frameworks are at a point where they are fast enough to do just about anything we need to do within the web. Sure, there's other scenarios that are some more specific scenarios that maybe that's not the case. But I feel like a lot of the performance gains are now not so much with runtime performance, but more so with developer performance of how quickly you can get things developed and maintained and updated, be able to make changes. And I think that Angular has taken a lot of steps to improve that developer experience and that aspect of performance that is less about runtime performance. Now, don't get me wrong, things like signals and change detection and everything else are great, and those are wonderful improvements. But I like the fact that the team is focusing on not just the technical performance, but also the developer performance.
Yeah, that, I agree with you on the point that you can reach a point of diminishing returns on performance investment. I don't think we're there yet. I think that we still have more work to do on making it easier for developers to build performant applications with Angular. And I phrase it that way kind of specifically because one of the ways we think about this, right, is like Angular is a tool and it is good at certain things. And with any framework or any tool, it's possible to misuse or abuse that thing and end up in a negative performance hole, or just walk off a cliff and do something that you shouldn't have done that, and now your performance is bad. Like, you could do that with anything. And
Challenge accepted.
What we've seen over the years, though, is that there's a lot of parts of Angular that make it a little bit too easy to walk off that performance path, like off the cliff. We have sometimes seen applications that end up doing something like 1,000 rounds of change detection on page startup. And that's too many. And we've also seen, applications that, people really understand the internals of the framework and are diligent about it and, keep change detections to a minimum and have very performant applications. But, that took a lot of expertise and it took a lot of discipline to get that. And really what we're focused on, and like Signals is the most emblematic thing of this, is trying to find ways to evolve the framework where we're making it so that you really have to go out of your way to walk off that performance cliff, where if you just kind of follow the getting started guide and you follow the examples and the tutorials and you just kind of do the thing that feels natural, then you will still end up on a more performant path and have a better time.
And I think that was kind of the maintenance part, and the part that Mike's referring to in the sense of, making that developer journey of writing that code and maintaining that code over time easier, and really, curating that, which is awesome with all these changes. I think that
no, I was just going to mention that Zen's comment just about the positive comments from former detractors of Angular after the introduction of Signals and things like the new control flow syntax. So definitely in the same vein of like, I'm personally excited to hear the buzz in the community.
That's the question that I have. So go ahead, Mike.
I like the idea of the guide rails that we're going to try and keep you on path as much as possible, whether or not that's through warnings or errors or just guidance or documentation or what have you. And speaking of documentation, the launching of Angular.dev, of cleaning up the docs and rethinking about those from the idea of learning and the suggested or ideal way to write an Angular application as that's evolved.
And Jeremy, are you ever frustrated at the slowness in which developers move?
Which developers?
Well,
the ones he oversees, or like everybody in general?
The adoption of new features. Because for me, I'm like, oh man, this thing is in RC and it's not everywhere on everything I own, right? Like I just get this panicky feeling like I've got to use it right now. But like I recently did an Angular 17 webinar and had hundreds of people attend, and I did a little poll, and I was just like I didn't really think I needed to ask this question, right? Like in my heart of hearts, but I said, how many of you have seen the new docs? Like it was just like an innocent, have you seen these new docs? Like, do I even need to go over them? And 80% had not even seen them. And I was like, but 17 is out. I don't understand. So I'm still trying to like the adoption rate, right? Like
like obviously we did, kind of announce the new doc site, angular.dev, as part of V17, and it's available and you can go to it, but it is not indexed on search engines yet. that is kind of the reason why I think people aren't discovering it. And the reason we're not indexing yet is because it's still, technically in beta. We worked very hard to get the release out in V17, and then we had some cleanup work to do after V17. And you've all been there, right? Of like, you launch the thing and then you need a little bit of time to like go back and do a couple of things over after you launch the thing.
Fast follows. We call them fast follows, right?
Yeah.
We'll get you that in a fast follow, so we'll defer it right after.
Yeah, and there's still, most of the documentation that's on angular.dev is the same documentation that was on angular.io. Some of it has been rewritten. In particular, I completely rewrote the components guide from scratch, and I'm very happy with the way that it came out. So definitely check that out. And I'm hoping to rewrite some more guides before we get to the final version of it. But we still have some last to-dos to strike through before we do that final flip to make angular.dev the full site. At which point we'll probably remove angular.io from like search engine indexes.
Okay.
Because we don't want it to be confusing when you search for something like, I'm going to search for Angular directive, and you get like 2 separate pages coming up, and you're like, well, which of these is the right one?
Right.
So we want to make sure that we're only showcasing one at a time, and on either one you'll go to, you'll be able to jump to, if you want a documentation page for an old version of Angular, you'll be able to jump to that.
Oh, I see.
Through like a version picker on the site, and that will still be kind of the old version of the site. We're not kind of backporting old versions of the documentation into new versions of the site.
Right.
So will that then also be hosted under angular.dev? Is that supposed to be the home of all versions, or will angular.io live as the pre-17 documentation site?
I actually don't remember what we decided about that.
One of the two. Got it.
Yeah. I feel like I asked this question and was told Angular.io is not going anywhere just because of like perseverance of like links and things, but that could have changed. Yeah. I thought that was the direction.
I think the old links, right? Because if you go to like v15.angular.io, I think we want to keep that link live.
Okay. Yep.
All right, I got my question then. So we talked about like signals and there's the control flow and things like that. So there's a bunch of new features coming out that are amazing, right? And it feels like a load of a lot of them that feel like they're potential replacements for some of the stuff we've done. Like, so when we talk about control flow, right, we have the directives and they're kind of going to control flow. So my question is like, how do you deal with the future of saying like, are those other things going to get deprecated? Like our ngIf directive, is that going to go away and we're going to be at some point like that's no longer usable? Or are we still in this world, that it moved forward?
I was hoping someone would ask this question, because this is a huge part of kind of our strategy around how we want to move the ecosystem over time. So the goal, like we have kind of a particular vision about where we want to go with the framework, and the things that you're seeing with, standalone components and the new control flow and signals, like these are all incremental steps towards that longer term vision of where we want to go. But there are a lot of parts of the framework that, aren't necessarily in that vision. But, there's thousands and maybe millions of applications out there that are relying on those things.
Right.
And our goal is to, whenever possible, bring developers along with us to the new features. So the control flow is really a great example here, where we are able to, in 99% of cases, automatically migrate people to the new thing. There are always going to be some edge cases, right? So if you use like a query, like, content child to like grab an instance of ngIf, it's like, well, we can't migrate that because that's not a thing anymore. But you probably shouldn't have been doing that anyway. So, edge cases notwithstanding, we think that we can, in a control flow case, just like completely automate this for people. They don't have to worry about it. In more complicated situations, right, like signals, we definitely aren't going to be able to fully migrate an application from kind of zoneless change detection to a signals-based change detection automatically. We'll definitely be able to give you some tools and schematics that help you, right? We kind of think of this as like tool-assisted upgrading. So we've done this for standalone already. So we have a trifecta of tools that will attempt to refactor a code base from ng modules to standalone. And we estimate that it will do something like 80 to 90% of the work for you. It will do all of the tedious things, all of the toil, right? Of just like, I'm going to change this to standalone true, and I'm going to import the directives that I'm using in the template and so on. But there are some, more complicated things around providers, right? Where if you have like an ng module that has providers, and maybe you have something like a for root kind of style API in one of your ng modules, and you're configuring something, that's not something we can really write an automated tool to be able to reason about to refactor for you. And so in those cases, we will leave it for you. But for the thinking is for most of the developers for most of your code, we'll be able to automate what we can and reduce the barrier to making that jump over to the latest version or the latest and greatest features. And when something is even more difficult than that, right? So zoneless is probably going to be the biggest kind of difference, where it's very, very challenging to write any kind of tooling that would be able to reason about the ways in which your application implicitly depends on the existence of Zone.js. And, it's monkey patching of all of these native browser APIs and how you're relying on that. And so in cases like that, we kind of expect that the zone-based approach will just continue to exist and be supported for the foreseeable future, right? So it's really a judgment call on any given change we make of something that's is this a replacement and we're going to get rid of the old thing? Is this maybe a longer term replacement where there's going to be a multi-year slide over into a new thing that's tool assisted, and we can eventually look at deprecating the older approach to doing it? And then there's the further end where the old thing's just going to continue to be supported, and that's fine, right? If you have an application that works and you don't feel compelled to, move it from zone-based change detection to signals, that's okay. And if you decide of your own volition that there's enough value proposition in you for migrating to signals from zones, then we want to give you tools to help you do that. And at the same time, for anybody who's new to Angular, right, we want to give them the cutting edge experience right out of the box, so that you're getting the latest and greatest and the simplest, fastest developer experience.
Do you think it'd be fair to say, because I had this question from a developer, I work at Progress and we make components for Angular, and they were asking about different features. And do you think it'd be fair to make a general statement about if the Angular team has created a new way of doing something, but the old way still exists, that the old way only exists not because they want it to, but because you're trying to bring developers along, and because it would be cruel to just be it's gone now, right? Is that kind of the mindset of thinking? Or are there actual use cases where you're no, I could see us forever keeping both ways, as valid going forward into the future? Because there are quite a few things where it's even, I don't see the chat was asking about, are pipes going to disappear? And Mike was computed for all the things. So can you speak to that? I'm curious, because I kind of was listen, if they offer a new, better way, we should just, if we can.
Yeah, I spoke to that a little bit, right? It really depends on how hard it is to transition away from that old thing, and how good the
Gains
newer replacement thing is, right? So pipes is a great example here, where I can absolutely see a world where pipes become obsolete. It's not there yet. It's not something we're planning on doing right now. But in a world where we have things that are mostly based on signals, and we have computeds, and maybe we have the ability to use module level functions in your template instead of having something be a method on a component class, right? If it's easier to just use a function that you have somewhere, then the appeal of pipes kind of fades to the point where it's like, well, like, what is this really even giving you anymore? Why have this weird syntax that most JavaScript, TypeScript developers are not even going to be familiar with from the start when you could just call a function? It would be great if the pipeline operator made some progress in TC39. That would maybe expedite this a little bit. But if we will always have to do this calculation at every stage of our development of like, hey, we've gotten to this point where you can use module level things in components, and you can use you can use full, like, another thing that we're thinking about someday is like, what if your template expressions are just like full TypeScript, right? What if we don't have this kind of subset of that's this Angular expression syntax, right? If we're moving in that direction, at what point do pipes just not make sense for people anymore, and they're not providing value? And how migratable is that? Right, because one of the things I'll mention also really quickly, right? I've talked a little bit about how we support both open source developers and developers inside of Google. When we make changes inside of Google, we are responsible for making those changes for every application that uses it. So Google, we've talked about this plenty of times before in ngconf and things, like, all of Google's code is in one like giant repository that's at head all the time. And so if you were to like make a breaking change, like you just rename a function, then a ton of teams builds would just break, and they would start pinging you being like, hey, you broke our build, please revert your change. And so we're on the hook for doing any migrations when we want to change things. And that's kind of the seed that plants like, why do we even have ng update in the first place? Is because we're kind of on the hook for making these kinds of changes in Google anyway. So when we write tooling to do this, right, we're trying to reuse as much of that tooling as possible to run like inside Google and as part of ng update or ng generate. And that we feel the pain of the migration, right? We're not like we're not a framework that can just like make changes and be like, deal with it, developers. we feel that pain because we have to go upgrade the several thousand Google applications that might be using any given API. And it also gives us a lot of information, right? Because if we look at the entire Google code base and we say like, oh, there's like 3 places that use this API. I think one we were looking at recently is in testing, you can do component fixture to detect changes and pass it false to say, I want to disable safety guard in my test. We're like, does anybody use this? Like, is this something we can get rid of? And we looked, it's like, oh, there are 17 places where people use it. Like, yeah, we could probably move away from that. It's not very used.
That's a nice thing about
just
the way that a lot of the recent features have been implemented, is that they're additive. Hey, we added signals, but you can still do everything that you used to do. Do you use the Google code base as a metric to say, we may have deprecated something of when do you actually remove it from the code base? Or is it indefinite or is it a different metric or idea to use to say, all right, when do we go from, hey, this thing's been deprecated for 7 years. Is it time to actually get rid of that now? We've given people enough warning.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of calling us out because we do have a lot of APIs that were deprecated a long time ago that we've never.
I had no knowledge of that. I wasn't specific. I was just giving some context to the question.
Yeah, so we do look at usage as one data point in deciding when to remove something. But like, to be completely honest, like, we will deprecate something when we think it's no longer the best thing for developers to use, or we think there's a better replacement. Yeah. And we will remove it when we have time to remove it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because sometimes removing something, right, we try to make sure we have a schematic that will migrate you. And it's not as easy as going and just deleting the code. And so because it's not so trivial to delete things, some deprecated APIs tend to linger for multiple versions. And this is actually, something that's come up in our, we have like team retrospectives from time to time. It has come up as a recurring item of like, boy, it sure would be nice to get rid of some of these deprecated APIs. It's hard to prioritize that when we also have so much like new work going on. It's like, well, our developers going to get more value today from us, making more progress on signals, or, doing a new template, like a new feature, or removing, I don't know, like this old router reuse strategy.
So specific question in that regard with deprecations. With the new control flow syntax, were ngIf and ng4 marked as deprecated in favor of the control flow?
Not yet, because the new control flow is still in developer preview.
Fair.
We wanted it to get some use in the wild before we fully committed the new control flow to stable, even though we're pretty confident that it's pretty good.
Then is that the intention?
Yes.
Okay.
The intent is to, when new control flow goes stable, is to deprecate ngIf, ng4, ng-switch, and to have automated tools to just migrate you to the new thing. We already have those tools, right? You can run it optionally to just like move your code over. And I will mention, like, the developer preview for this has actually gone really well because we found a lot of bugs in that tool because the developers in the community were enthusiastic, ready to try it out, and reported a lot of bugs. And
the tool that switches you over?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Jessica in particular, like, worked on that tool. It's really fantastic. And I know she's like fixed a ton of bugs that were thanks to developers trying it out and reporting things.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
So this is the one thing I want to dive a little bit deeper into is the control flow and this ng4, ngIf, right? And the eventual, deprecation or whatnot. I think there's I'm hearing a big concern over this. People are asking these questions, right? Like, yes, we have tooling to automate that change, right? But if I'm sitting on like 600 libs of components that all pretty much have ngIf inside of them, it's a pretty scary thing to run that change. And maybe I don't have full test regression coverage over that. And so am I going to run that change over these 600 libs that have multiple components in them and feel confident that like all those things are going to work, right? So now from a standpoint of from business side, we got to think about like, how do we incrementally maybe target things that we could cover and test and manually review to feel good about that change, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, I think there's definitely, you can take an incremental approach to this, right? Like, by no means are we going to, remove the old APIs, like promote the new thing to stable and remove the old one in the same version, right? We're always going to give people what we think is a decent sized window to do the transition, and definitely doing things incrementally, right? Of like, I wouldn't run the tool over like a 14 million line code base and just like, all right, let's commit that all in one commit. But
so you're saying you are not a chaotic neutral person. Okay. I got it.
Yeah. Every project's different. Do what works best for you and your team, but probably, split it up into smaller pieces. And I guess kind of the question is like, how do you have confidence that that is actually the right thing? Like the hope is to, there's good test coverage that is going to catch things. We know that that's not always the case in real life. We're a little bit spoiled inside of Google because Google applications generally do have very good test coverage, sometimes too good a test coverage. But yeah, like there's no like perfect answer here of saying like, how do I, it would be great if I had like a tool that was like guaranteed to be right 100% of the time. And like, that's just not how software works, right? There's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be edge cases.
I feel like just a tool to like point at the problems, right? Because Alyssa's very ADHD and like feel like I would definitely ship something thinking I'd converted everything. So on a lot of these, when they don't, because you'd mentioned like that's too complicated of a scenario for us to actually migrate over with a tool, does it at least like point at it and say, hey, you should do something about that?
We have done schematics before that insert to-dos.
Oh, shut up. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Oh my God.
Yeah, there are some times when we can identify a pattern that we can't migrate, but we know that it's there. And so we'll put a to-do there for you. I've proposed this idea. It has never really gotten any traction with the rest of the team, but I would like it if in situations like that where we're putting in to-dos, we also generated a spreadsheet, like a CSV that you could import into Jira.
Oh my God. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Okay, sorry, I'm nerding out too hard.
If you want that, go file a GitHub feature request and then have all of your team upvote it.
I get like a little thumbs up on GitHub from Jeremy.
We take the thumbs up seriously, right?
Oh,
We're always like sorting issues by thumbs up and saying like, well, what's the most requested feature right now? And that's a big reason why we've done like some of the things we've done over the past couple of releases, like this is a bit further back, but like type checking for forms and being able to support the CSP settings for style source, I think is the one, or inline style. I forget which exact CSP setting it was, but.
Well, I was imagining it for Justin, like the problem that you were mentioning about just like these dependencies, right? And they're all using it. Imagine you like run this tool and then you're like, cool, 1,399 to-dos. And then like a month or two later, you rerun it and you're like, oh, 580 because like those dependencies updated and they removed things or they didn't, right? And so it's kind of almost a way of gauging quickly of like, I could do that by hand. Now, yeah. Nathan had a couple comments. Nathan, I'm not ignoring you. I was just trying to find a good hole to bring it in. Earlier, he said, I'd love more documentation on patching, filling, and reactive forms, specifically dynamic ones. It's very hard or I'm doing it wrong. And then later when we were talking about migrations, they asked for, can we get a tool to convert reactive forms to template forms?
Probably not. Not on that one, no. However, one of the things we would like to explore in the not too distant future is kind of a revamp of forms in general. And we have a long list of like, these are pain points with the forms module. And one of the pain points is that there are two types of form system, right? That you have the reactive and template. And when we are walking into this revamp of the forms module, that is one of the things we would like to try to resolve and say like, now, like there is one way of doing forms that has, I don't know, I don't want to necessarily say the best of both, but like that we think is the right set of trade-offs for balancing, correctness and maintainability with developer experience.
We're not the only
guide rails
framework with this paradigm, right? Like, right? Like, did everyone else take a stance and like make a choice and like their forms all look the same? Like, are we the only?
I don't know that other frameworks have like first-party forms modules. We might be the only one. I don't actually know a ton about the community ones for other frameworks.
Framework versus libraries.
Jeremy, I think it goes back to that point that you made earlier about developers like finding their way off the cliff, right? And like because there's so many ways you can do, and they all work, right, in some fashion. So you finally get into some way that worked, but didn't work ideally for what you want. And so more like Mike said, guardrails, and more of like the one forms to rule them all sort of thing would kind of help provide that path, to walk forward.
Yeah. But also going back to the part of that question was about documentation, right? Like I would love to rewrite the documentation for forms. I would love actually for most of our like primary modules, like I did components already, but I would like to rewrite the guide for templates and for forms. And I actually like have an outline. Andrew Scott and I, we wrote an outline for what a rewritten router module documentation would look like. And so there's a lot we would like to improve in the documentation is kind of on our list. And, our backlog is, many items deep. And so we're trying to get to things as in the order we think makes sense most days.
Does all of Google have to be up to date, like all the projects, as soon as like when V17 was released, was everything on V17 that day?
So there is no concept of versions or releases for Google projects. When we commit a change to Angular, that every application is on that change at that point. Everything is at head all the time.
Oh, that's great. Sorry.
Now that's for the code base. Is that also the same for deployment? So if you were to make a change, does that automatically deploy all of those things, or is that something you can't discuss? That's fair.
I mean, it's up to the application, right? Okay. Every application is going to set up their own deployment strategy. And I think there are some teams that deploy on every change, and I think there are some that do like weekly releases or like weekly releases that are staged to a QA release that roll out, right? It's very up to the team.
All right, Jeremy, you opened a door and I'm going to try and walk through it. You talked about the potential of moving to a single forms-based module or form-based system, combining best of both worlds, I'm assuming, from reactive and template. What other things do you see on the near-term roadmap?
So the way I want to frame this is less about these are things we're going to do and more about these are pain points that we see that we would like to do something about. And that gives me the freedom to say, like, we want to do something about that. I don't necessarily know what that thing is yet, or I don't necessarily know when we will get to it.
I wasn't aware we had too many more of those. Pain points, that is. No, I'm being dead serious. Have you not solved most of them? What is left?
There are quite a few pain points I left. I think that there's always going to be more, right? Like we will make changes and then there will be new pain points.
Before you answer that, can you put them into one of two camps in terms of either developer productivity or application productivity or framework productivity?
So they're not always so clear cut, right? Because a big part of us trying to invest in signals, just as an example, because I keep bringing it up, is we see signals primarily as a developer experience improvement that makes your code kind of more concise and easier to reason about. But also there are some performance improvements or some potential for performance improvements baked into that as well. At the same time, though, we want to be very upfront that there's no silver bullets, right? There's no magic solutions that will fix all of your problems. And when we, get further along with signals and people start adopting it, they will have new problems. They will have new problems that we didn't anticipate. We're trying our best to anticipate the problems people will have and put in, warnings and checks and documentation, but there's always going to, developers are always going to find patterns that we didn't anticipate. And there's going to be more room for iteration after we get that far. So, we don't think that we're ever going to get to a point where it's like, it's done and it's perfect. No software is ever done. So
can we talk about routes? For some reason, it's hot in the chat.
Well, I want to let me answer Mike's question first.
Do it.
Things like, so what are some of the things that we're thinking about? So, I'll say beyond signals, because like that is like our, where most of our engineering effort is going today into signals. Like you may have seen, we just had added signal-based inputs, and so queries and a different flavor of signal-based inputs that support two-way bindings those are in the works, and ultimately working towards the signal-based components that are described in the RFC, along with this kind of purview change detection. Like all of this is like things we've already talked about in signals RFCs. Beyond that, the big area that we're interested in improving is in the component authoring experience. And so this is more developer experience, but in this developer experience, right, we may find opportunities that are also opening the door to performance improvements as well. So the biggest thing that's part of the component authoring experience that's on our minds is selectors as the mechanism for using components, and what we kind of think of as this double import problem. So today in Angular, when you want to use a component, you have to first import it from its TypeScript module. Then you take that symbol and you put it in the imports of your component that is going to use it. And then you reference its CSS selector in your template. And this is a little bit clunky and it's a little bit error prone, right? Because especially if you're using a directive with an attribute selector, you can have attribute for components as well, like map buttons. Like emblematic of this problem is it's very easy to just put that selector in your template and forget to import it correctly, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't look right. Nothing gives you an error, but it's like, hey, my button just looks wrong and it doesn't like ripple when I click it. What's going on? And so you have to go and then figure out like, oh, I didn't actually do this second level of import that I needed to do. So we see that as, a decent point of friction. And then there's also some kind of like technical underpinning issues with the selectors of like, we have to do that selector matching at runtime. And it's like a fair amount of code that does that selector matching. And so we see that as like a friction point, not just for developers, but also kind of for the maintenance of the framework itself. And so that's something we're thinking about like, hey, what can we do to improve this? And I'll leave it at that. There's also, we see people using ngIf and the new if syntax as sometimes to just get an alias to create an alias for an expression in your template, right? You'll be like ngIf something, and then just like as store the result.
Are you saying that's like not what you want us to do?
It's not how it was intended to be used.
Yeah.
To just like, they don't even need the if, they just want to like store that as an expression. So like, well, that again, that's a friction point. What if we made it easier to kind of introduce a variable like that and kind of reuse the result of an expression in your template, since we see that that's something people want to do.
I think like along that, you talked about earlier about getting kind of like some more native JavaScript stuff in our template, right? That could be something that solves that sort of thing as well too.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like again, like another friction point is that Angular's template expression syntax is JavaScript based, but it's not just TypeScript, right? Like, if you're using something like, like React, where your templating code is kind of just part of your TypeScript lexical context, then you're like, yeah, you just use the full range of TypeScript that you have available to you, and like it's nothing weird. Whereas like we have like, oh, like you can't use arrow functions in Angular templates, and we have pipes, which is not standard JavaScript syntax, and you can't do typecasts. The best you can do if your like types aren't lining up is like we have this $any function you can wrap your thing in that just kind of opts it out of type checking, right? Like these are all friction points with that expression syntax, and it sure would be much simpler if you could just use regular TypeScript in your template. Obviously, there's some like complications to that, right? Because like, what is the evaluation context of that template today? It's the class, which carries some different, some like interesting challenges on how to say like, well, how do we make this just TypeScript? So again, like a friction point we see that we would like to act on in like the medium term. We don't have, anything we're saying like, we are going to do this. This will be the solution to the problem yet, but we're thinking about it.
Is there any thing on the roadmap for interop with web components or something to kind of get the web component story into Angular?
It's something that's often on my mind, right? I actually wrote a document a few years ago now that was just this long laundry list of, here are things like, if we wanted to improve the experience of custom elements, I'll say custom elements specifically, with Angular, both in terms of how do I using custom elements in an Angular context, or I want to author with Angular and produce a custom element. There are things we could do better for both of those. And it just, to be honest, hasn't really been a priority for us. We use a lot of factors to decide like what our priorities are for the framework, right? We look at GitHub activity, we look at votes, we talk to people at ngconf, we, We have DevRel who are going to lots of conferences and events, talking to developers. We have a lot of Google engineers who are using Angular and directly giving us feedback because they can just, ping us and tell us things. And all of those kind of get synthesized together. And the volume of people asking about Angular elements in particular, or the custom elements developer experience, is just much lower than other things that we're hearing. And so
yeah, chat was asking, is Angular elements still a thing? Legit asking.
So it's still a thing. Like, it's still there. It still works. It's not deprecated, but we don't have anyone working on it, right? I think like no one's even really like prioritizing bug fixes for it right now, unless, something like critical or breaking were to come up. So there's a few things like that in Angular where it's like, it's there, it's stable, you can use it. It's not a focus of our active development right now.
Okay.
And the custom element story is really just part of that umbrella of, it's there, it works. It could be better, but it's just not what we're focused on right now. It may change in the future, but we've just got other stuff we're prioritizing.
So it's that custom element side of the thing that I think is the friction, right? And I gotta I'll assemble the army and we'll upvote those things and find out where that's upvoted at. Because I think that the ability to say, I want to consume web components in my Angular templates, like that's the important part, because for us and our team, it allows us to move more of our presentational components to web components, share them across the team that are using other frameworks, right? Yeah. And still consume them in a nice manner inside of Angular and be successful. So
yeah, the biggest thing I would like, maybe this is a good area for a community contribution if someone is really invested in it, but or maybe not, because it would be pretty breaking. But the challenge there is the biggest thing that doesn't work well for custom elements, using custom elements in Angular today, is the type checking, right? You have to so by default, Angular will just throw an error if you try to use an HTML element it doesn't know about. And that is the behavior most people seem to want, so that's good. And the way you turn that off is a little weird. You specify in your component schemas, custom element schema. The original rationale behind this API was that there'll be some way for people to specify the schema for custom elements that says okay, these are the tag names that are custom elements and these are the properties that they have. But that was never really fleshed out. It was like a very hand-wavy thing in the very beginning of Angular's development of yeah, there'll be some sort of schema. People can put that here. So that's why that API is kind of a little bit weird like that today. And you have to say custom element schema instead of just custom elements true. The way we would want to go about supporting them today would be through having DTS files, typings, that declared the type signature for those custom elements as something that extends HTML element. So you would basically have some DTS file that's my date picker extends HTML element and declares whatever properties that it has, whatever attributes it has. There would be overloads for set attribute that supports this stuff. And the main roadblock to being able to do that today is that Angular doesn't use the DTS files for DOM APIs that ships with TypeScript today, because it didn't exist when we first started.
Oh yeah, that's a good reason. I was wondering. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So Angular has its own typings, its own kind of understanding of DOM APIs, and they are subtly different than the ones that TypeScript publishes. Nice. And so switching over to the TypeScript ones is a pretty significant breaking change for existing applications. And we would need to do that first before we could get to that point of just using DTS files to do the type checking and understanding for custom elements.
Would they be easier? Sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's just it's not work we've been able to carve out time to prioritize and deal with the aftermath of that kind of breaking change.
Would moving away from CSS selectors on components make it easier to identify the custom elements and therefore potentially look up the DTS for those, because you're no longer looking at selectors, you're looking at an actual class there?
we would probably still have the same problem, right? Because even if you are, just as an example, referencing components directly by their symbol, their class or whatever, then we're still doing type checking for the native DOM APIs, right? For like input and video and div, right? We're making sure that you're not binding to an attribute or a property that doesn't exist.
Okay.
Actually, we don't do anything for attributes, just properties. But we would still need to make that change.
I want to be respectful because I know you might have meetings. So I know we're at the top of the hour. And there was one thing that was actually upvoted a lot in the chat. Global setting for on push standalone. It's not nice having to write that in every single component. So that was
there's a reason we don't have that. There's a reason we don't. And it's because libraries exist. You may be importing a library from NPM that is not built to be on push or is not built to be standalone. And we can't like put that setting on code that was not written to be that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Did
we, because at one point you were like, that's a good question. I'm glad someone brought that up. And that made me think, oh no, what if we don't ask all the right questions? So were all the right questions asked, Jeremy? Was there anything that you were like, I really hope I get to share this today?
You definitely got in all of the questions that touched on the topics I had in mind to talk about. So I don't remember the exact wording of the topic I submitted, but it was like basically like how we think about evolving Angular over time. And I think we covered a lot of category, a lot of that category, especially in terms of our, schematics, ng update, how we bring the ecosystem along, like the different types of ecosystem changes we see. I did see someone ask about ng deep in the chat right there.
I'm scared about your answer. I'm scared. All right, what do you say?
We should undeprecate it.
Yes,
we should.
Thank you. I agree.
Yeah. And then we probably won't do this, but I also think it would be better if we renamed it from ng deep to ng global. Because really what it is, it's a marker that you put on a style that says just like opt out of view encapsulation, make this a global style.
Yes.
I'm not saying we are going to do this. I think we should. But I don't unilaterally make decisions on the team. I can just make suggestions, and then we have to build up a consensus and decide to do things as a group.
Mike and I are gonna bring ng deep back as our ng conf MC shirts.
Now, it makes us so happy to hear that you on the inside have that mentality. It's not just us, right? And we're like, who's going to help champion this? Keep ng deep or ng global, right?
Now, I will be clear. I don't think people should be using ng deep, right? But I know that sometimes you have no other option.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, boys, do you have any picks today? Do you have anything you want to highlight or ask before we sign off, Mike or Justin?
Nah, not this week.
Nah, I'm good. This was awesome. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And Jeremy,
do we plug like recommendations at the end of this or anything?
We do, and it can be technical or non-technical, anything that just really like spiced up your life maybe recently, things like that. So
I've got some good ones, and my recommendations are great. Platinum seal of approval.
Tell us right now.
So first is a book, Priory of the Orange Tree.
Ooh.
I read this recently and I enjoyed it immensely. I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction.
Same.
But
it's like only a single book. It's not a series.
Yep. It's a single standalone book. It does have a prequel, but it's more of just like if you were interested in the world building, let's dig more into that world building.
Excellent. I love it. I am a very big fantasy reader. I feel bad because there's a lot of people in my life that they're very they read very serious books about serious things. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I can't follow you down that rabbit hole.
Oh, yes.
Ever.
my significant other reads primarily history.
Oh, no.
And books about diseases and plagues. And I can't do that. But I managed to recently convince her to start reading the works of Brandon Sanderson, which has been nice.
Oh. You have so much ahead of you. I'm so jealous. The world is open at your feet, Jeremy.
And then my second recommendation is a video game, Chance of Senar,
Oh,
It is a puzzle game where you are deciphering a language or multiple languages as the game progresses. Then you kind of have to figure out, just by kind of exploring and interacting with the world, not only the vocabulary of the language, but like the syntax and the grammar and how these languages kind of relate to each other. And it's a really great puzzle game. It has, I think, some inspiration from Return of the Obra Dinn, which is an all-time classic detective puzzle game.
nice.
And it's, a great game, anyone of all ages or video game experience to enjoy.
You like PC or do you play on a console?
I play mostly on PC, switching between the PC I'm on now and my Steam Deck, which is on the couch in the background.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Jeremy, I cannot thank you enough for coming on today. It was a magnificent episode, and I'm a big fan of your work. So thank you. Thank you so much. And just for being here for the community. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back anytime.
Excellent. Excellent. And will we see you at NGConf perchance? Maybe?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know if that was publicly announced. I'm very on the backlog of announcements. So sorry if that was already out there, but I cannot wait. Cannot wait.
I plan to be at NGConf. I believe Minko and I will be doing the keynote again this year.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, chat. You've been beautiful. Seriously. So active, very witty. It was good to see all your faces. We're going to hear a word from our sponsors and sign off today, but I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And that's a wrap. Bye. Angular Air is sponsored by Kendo UI for Angular. We have over 100 components built from the ground up in Angular or each framework and library that it's built for. So not only do we have Angular on the JavaScript side, but we have Kendo UI for React, jQuery, and Vue as well. And if you're on the .NET side of life, we have things for Blazor, Maui, WPF, and so much more. All of our libraries are themable, customizable, and of course come with killer professional support. So try it out for free today at kendoui.com.